members who were not able to make it due to prior commitments, this will be recorded. So I'm looking forward to everything that's going to be presented this morning. As you've watched in the news lately, climate change has been a big topic. So we were happy when Elizabeth reached out to us about being able to provide some training to us in Pennsylvania. So knowing that climate change is a big thing and has been a big topic, we jumped at the chance to do that and have Elizabeth with us this morning. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Elizabeth, let her introduce herself. And again, Elizabeth, welcome to Pennsylvania. Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. All right, there we go.
There you are. I can hear you.
Great. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Denise. I'm excited to be here. I just wanted to, let me see if I can advance the slide. Dave Hollinger, are you on the line?
Good morning, Elizabeth. Dan, I'm here, thanks.
Great. So we'll start, how about we start with you?
Okay, terrific. All right, well, thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Dave Hollinger. I'm the director of the Northeast Climate Hub. And Elizabeth and I are really excited to be here with you folks today. And we're really, excited about the opportunity of working more closely with Pennsylvania on this issue.
Amen.
So Elizabeth is the Climate Hub Liaison this year from New York State. Pennsylvania has been very good. The Climate Hubs were set up, I think some of you may remember, under the Obama administration now, almost 6 years ago. And NRCS has sort of made available liaisons to work with the Climate Hubs. And actually, the very first liaison that worked with us was Dan Losty. So we're very grateful for Pennsylvania and excited to be back here. So the Climate Hubs are all about working in that space between climate change and outreach. So trying to sort of translate and understand the science and kind of make it practical so that folks like you and of course our producers can come up with realistic, cost-effective, practical solutions to these issues. There are about a dozen of us working across the USDA. I'm actually with the Forest Service. I'm a plant physiologist. In addition to folks with NRCS, such as Elizabeth, we also have Lynn Knight, an agricultural economist with us. We have folks from the Agricultural Research Service. In fact, today we have sort of a sub-office in Pennsylvania, and I think Kurt Gell, who's a manure specialist or researcher at the Agricultural Research Service located on the Penn State campus, is here on the call today. We also have Tony Buda, a hydrologist located in the same office. And really, we're just trying to work with you folks and now kind of keep up with the new priorities of this new administration, which is really bringing climate change to the forefront of all of our agendas. We'll say the Climate Hubs have a website, newsletters. You can see some of our ways of reaching you and reaching other people that you may want to reach. So we produce materials that you can use for these sorts of purposes. And I think Elizabeth's going to go into that a little bit more during the training today. I will say we also have worked with extension as well, the state extension across the region. So this particular Northeast Climate Hub stretches from Maine down to West Virginia. And we have in each of the states, we have contacts within extension that we've been working with them highly enough as well. I don't want to take too much time here, but I do want to just take a minute to provide a quick update about the sort of our new administration and its new climate priorities, because they've been coming sort of fast and curious. It's hard to keep up with them all. On the day that he took office, President Biden started the process of rejoining Paris, which is actually it's a pretty big deal. The goal of the Paris Agreement is to limit sort of warming, as it's understood, to below 2 degrees Celsius. So that's 3.5 degrees. And this is really, this is fantastic that the U.S. is sort of joining this goal, because it does mean that we will likely not experience some of the worst disasters, the eco disasters that you hear about in the news. Doing this really means that we are addressing these issues and will not suffer those tremendous consequences. But it also means a number, and I think a surprising number of changes to our economy. And some of these were just kind of indicated yesterday in a new executive order, which was, I think, titled Tackling Climate Change Throughout the World, or something like that, or Tackling the Climate Crisis. Anyway, there was one thing you may have heard in the news, of course, is sort of, I guess there are going to be new rules about limiting leasing oil and gas on federal lands, which has gotten a lot of press, but also within that same sort of series of executive orders, there was one that suggests that the federal government will be buying electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. Actually, I think it's all electric, so vehicles that no longer use oil and gas in the future. So that's a big change, I guess, coming to us personally as government employees. There were also several kind of aspects that relate directly to conservation, agriculture, and reforestation. Just in the order yesterday, there was a new commitment to conserving 30% of our country's lands by 2030. There was a new order for civilian climate corps, and then there was a new order about the Secretary of Agriculture collecting input from farmers, ranchers, and other stakeholders about how federal programs can be used to encourage the adoption of, and I'll quote it right here, climate smart agricultural practices that produce verifiable carbon reductions and sequestrations and create new sources of income and jobs for rural America. So I think the climate smart training today is probably pretty well targeted on all of this. There are some more details about what might be happening in a document that came out sort of back in November called Climate 21. And this was a document.
Now I can hear the meeting.
Likely changes that the USDA should make. And this document was actually written by the head author, Robert Bonney. And if anybody hasn't muted, please mute your microphone if you can there. Anyway, Robert Bonney was installed on the first day of the Biden administration in the Secretary's office, even though we don't have a new Secretary of Agriculture in charge of climate change. So he wrote a report, and he's.
I don't think everyone can hear you, so that's a good sign.
Okay.
Excuse me, this is Tim Kinney. Anyone that is
He's
has not muted their line,
for
you
implementing
can mute it now.
Very cool. So you're muted.
Please.
Okay.
Hey, I think, could somebody mute, please? Donald, it might be you. Thank you. Anyway, this new document is written by Robert Bonney, the former Undersecretary of the USDA, and he's also been put in charge of sort of implementing it. So I think it's worth all of our time to maybe get a little bit familiar with it. It is publicly available. It's called Climate 21. You can Google it. I know our leadership are all looking at it, and it has a number of basically ideas, plans for USDA, including some that basically target programs within NRCS directly. What's up there on the screen right now is some of the content in that, which specifically talks about using NRCS conservation programs, equip and whatnot, and kind of fine tuning them a little bit to the goal of sequestering carbon in soils. This is quite a big change. We have to wait and see who becomes the new when Secretary Vilsack is appointed. He has been nominated, I guess. His hearing is scheduled for next week. But anyway, this document has a lot of big changes for USDA. It's certainly going to be exciting to see what happens. There are funding levels in there, which depend, of course, on what Congress does. And it's not, we don't want to get too far out ahead of leadership on this, but I do think that this is a very interesting idea. You could sort of think of it as a weather vane on which way things are going. So it has this one focus on combating climate change, and especially sequestering or storing carbon in soils. That's a big part of it. But it has a second sort of important aspect, and that's bringing rural America along on this task. So it talks about using the Commodity Credit Corporation to help pay farmers to store carbon in the soil. It talks about reducing the price of insurance for farmers that use climate smart practices. Lots and lots of stuff in here. We'll just have to wait and see how much of it actually unfolds. But it seems, based on the announcements that are already coming in these executive actions, that a lot of the material in this document is going to become our practices. So very exciting. Dan said the timing, I think, for the training is spot on. I don't want to take any more of your time here, but I will say Elizabeth and I are really happy to have this opportunity today. We're all looking forward to seeing how this sort of rolls out and serving the American people. And just want to remind you all, we're here as a resource for you. And thanks again for being here today.
I know your audio was coming in and out a little bit, but I just wanted to say Dave Hollinger is the director of the USDA Northeast Climate Hub. Some of you may be familiar with the hub. Dan Dosty was on detail, I believe, in 2016. So some of you might know him. It has been such an amazing year. I've been on detail to the hub this past year. Normally in my regular job, I am a biologist with NRCS New York. I cover the eastern part of New York. And it's been such an amazing year working with the Climate Hub. They are this really unique collaboration between the Forest Service, NRCS, and Ag Research Service, and they also bring in a lot of partners, including Extension. So just wanted to give a shout out to Lynn Knight. She is a co-director of the hub with NRCS. Some of you might know Lynn. She is an economist with the East National Tech Center, but she also teaches the economics of conservation planning. And Kurt Dell, who is in Pennsylvania, who is also a co-director with ARS for the hub. So I also want to give a shout out to any former RC&D coordinators in Pennsylvania. I think I saw Susan, Perry on, Ryan, anybody else, please let me know in the chat box, which I can see, which is great. So that's good. For today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about climate change trends over the last 125 years, why these changes are occurring, some hope, climate smart farming, and just some NRCS related things. And then at the end, there's going to be a quiz competition with a special prize. I am a typical New Yorker. I love interruptions. If you want to make any comments or have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. I can actually see the chat box. And also feel free to unmute your microphone only if you have a question or a comment. Otherwise, keep those microphones muted. So am I sounding okay? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, let me know if you can. So before we get into the presentation, I just want to mention the difference between weather versus climate. So weather is happening at a point in time, and climate is the general trend in weather. Some other phrases to describe climate change. Climate change has become a very politicized term. So you might find people not having a negative reaction to that term. You can also use terms like weather volatility, weather extremes, changing weather patterns, weather unpredictability. Those are all acceptable. We're going to be talking about climate smart farming today. There are other terms for that as well. Some people might know it as natural climate solutions, engineering with nature, weather or drought resiliency, and soil health. When talking to farmers about climate change, you might find that some people don't believe it, don't believe it's happening. You yourself might not believe in climate change or that it's happening. That's okay. You do not need to believe that it's or believe that it's human caused in order to implement climate smart farming techniques, because these techniques are going to benefit the farm today. Talking about climate change, I find that the best way to talk about it with folks is to make it personal. And to ask farmers, what changes in weather have you noticed in your lifetime? And I want to do that today with you guys in Pennsylvania. What changes in weather have you noticed in Pennsylvania? Feel free to write in the chat box or unmute your microphone and let me know what your observations are. Chris says less major snowstorms, more intense rainfalls, less snow in the winters. Yeah, for sure. Anything else? The fall weather seems to last further into December than it used to. Oh, that's a really good observation. Less snow, warmer winter, intense rain throughout the late fall and winter. Yeah, that can be really problematic. It's fine if there's rain coming during the growing season. Susan says different species of plants and insects. Interesting. Cold springs. Oh, Deborah says, how many children today have actually built a snowman? Oh my gosh, that breaks my heart. Yeah, oof. Or go ice skating. Yeah, anybody else want to share anything? There's less clear days and greater humidity. Yep, we're seeing that in New York too. Or had a good day of sledding. Gosh, that is really upsetting. Yeah, you think about all the great winter activities, skiing. I wonder if my 4-year-old niece in New York, if there'll be a ski industry. Yeah, so these are all great, guys. So for me, I grew up in the Adirondacks, and fall foliage isn't as vibrant, changes in insects, types, and populations. Yeah, great observations, everybody. I I grew up in the Adirondacks, in the Lake George area. And when I graduated in high school in 1990, we didn't have ticks in the Adirondacks. And then about 10 years ago, I was back in my hometown and I pulled a tick off a friend's dog. And I realized, oh my goodness, ticks are in the Adirondacks. And that means Lyme disease is in the Adirondacks. That was pretty shocking. So another shocking thing that happened, so I built a energy efficient net zero home in Chatham, New York, just outside of Albany. And there's a wetland behind my house. And 2 of the last 5 years, I've heard peepers in January. Again, really shocking. I associate peepers, spring peepers, with April. It's even disturbing to hear them in March, but to hear them in January was pretty disturbing. Studies have also shown that the way to communicate to farmers about climate change is by using local trusted messengers. These are folks like you, field staff, soil and water folks, extension folks. You are the ones that farmers are getting their information from. And we have just this long, great history in USDA in working with farmers in the counties. We have it's just amazing to think that we have an agronomy specialist covering every county in every state in the country. So we have this real opportunity to educate farmers about what is happening and how they can be resilient to it. The picture on the left I got from the USDA Flickr account, which has a great album on historic photos. If you ever have time, or if you're putting together presentations, I highly recommend looking through them. But that's a photo from, I believe, the 20s or 30s of a USDA person working with a local farmer. Climate change over the last century. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening. So the information that in this next section has mainly come from the 4th National Climate Assessment. Oh, really? Susan said that was Ashley Spots. Oh, that's great. I didn't realize that person was from Pennsylvania. That's so cool. I got that off of the Flickr account as well. Oh, Letting, is she on? Cool. So this came from the next section, the 4th National Climate Assessment. So this assessment is a 1,500-page congressionally mandated report. It's done every 4 years, and the lead agency putting it together is NOAA. However, there are a lot of other contributors, including USDA. So if we look at the globe, the average global rise in temperature has been 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. So you can see that not every spot in the globe has been warming at the same rate. You can see the US, Canada, over Russia, that's been warming at a little bit higher rate, some parts of South America than other parts of the world. You see that little cooling area where it's actually gotten a little bit cooler in the North Atlantic. And we see that same trend in the United States as well. So not everywhere is warming at the same rate. The Northeast, unfortunately, we're warming pretty quickly, and that is due to the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming parts of the ocean in the world. You see the upper Midwest is also warming, that Utah, hot spot in Utah, Colorado, Oregon, parts of California, whereas the Southeast has been actually getting a little bit cooler in that Mississippi, Alabama area. So that can also account for why some parts of the country, like in the Northeast, we tend to believe in climate change because it's affecting us the most. Whereas in other parts of the country, they might not be seeing as big of a difference. And here's just a close-up of the Northeast. You can see Pennsylvania, the eastern part of Pennsylvania is warming a little bit faster than the other parts. With that, there's been a change in growing season length. I think somebody mentioned that what they've observed. Pennsylvania, you know, you're looking at 2.5 weeks increase in growing season length since 1895. California, Arizona, they're seeing as much as a 6-week increase in growing season length, where again, that area in Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama area, they're either staying the same or maybe even their growing season length is shortening. Somebody mentioned, I think it was you, Susan, that there's different pests that are happening. And with these increased temperatures, you are seeing an increase in average days, annual average days where ideal climate conditions exist for these pests. And if we use mosquitoes as an indicator species, we can see that the average annual days with ideal climate conditions for mosquitoes has increased quite a bit since 1980. I'm just trying to see if there's any city in Pennsylvania is on there, but you can see that there's some cities. Oh, Pittsburgh is on there. So a month greater in annual average days with ideal climate conditions just since 1980. So you're looking at a month in Pennsylvania since 1980 where mosquitoes are more active. In addition to the increased temperatures, we're also seeing changes in rainfall patterns. In the Northeast, the mid part of the country, we're seeing a really high increase in precipitation since 1895. And have this trend of wet areas getting wetter and dry areas getting drier. If you look at the Southwest, they're getting quite a bit drier, especially in Arizona. Not only are we seeing an increase in precipitation in the Northeast, we're also seeing a pretty dramatic rise in the number of storms that are heavy. So a heavy, very high precipitation is defined as a rainfall event where you have 2 inches or more of rain within a 24-hour period. And you can see the eastern part of the US is really seeing that increase of these very high, very intense storms. In particular, the Northeast is seeing that change the greatest. And what's happening in Pennsylvania. So the information that I am using came from, in this next section, from the NOAA state climate summaries. Has anybody seen these fact sheets before? These are excellent 4 to 5 page fact sheets that summarize the climate trends that are occurring in each state. They're for every state in the country. They go into predictions as well. I'm not going to cover predictions or what's expected to happen in the future. I'm just going to concentrate on what's already happened, some of those trends. But if you want those predictions, they're in the state climate summary. So after today's presentation, I'm going to send a link to Dan of where you can download this presentation. In case you want to use any of my slides, you're more than welcome for any outreach presentations of your own, but I'll include the Pennsylvania fact sheet. So in Pennsylvania, the average temperatures have increased about 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900. If you think back to the map, you can see like the eastern part of Pennsylvania has warmed a little bit, but there was an area, probably the northern Appalachia part of Pennsylvania, I'm guessing that has cooled a little bit. So I think you're seeing that average has come down, or the average is 2 degrees, but definitely the eastern part of Pennsylvania is a little bit warmer than that 2 degrees. Warmer winters and increased rain in winter and spring means longer mud season and delayed planting. A bunch of mentioned that. Average rainfall has increased 11% since 1895. extreme rain events over 2 inches has increased 93% just since 1950. So you're getting those more intense storms. Sea levels have risen 8 inches since 1880. I had to think about that for a moment because I was like, does Pennsylvania have any sea coast? But I think you have maybe some tidal rivers. Do you guys have tidal rivers in Pennsylvania? So here is a chart looking at the observed annual precipitation, the 5-year average over the last 120 years. So you can see that in the 50s and 60s, that was a pretty dry period. You were maybe getting 37, 38 inches on average. If you compare that, we're seeing now of 6 inches on average, that's quite a bit different, that almost 10 inches. And then here is the chart that represents the observed number of extreme precipitation events. Those storms that are over 2 inches of 2 inches of rain in 24 hours. And this is really probably, out of all the changes, the most difficult for farmers to adapt to. It's pretty easy to adapt to temperature change, and I'll go over do that, you can adapt to drought by irrigating, but it's these heavy, intense storms that are really hard on crops and really hard for farmers to deal with. Oh, first of all, any questions on the data from Pennsylvania or comments? Okay. So why are these changes happening? This is happening due to the greenhouse effect. So you guys are probably familiar with that term. That's where sunlight goes to the atmosphere, hits the earth. Some of that heat is radiated back out into space, but a lot of it is trapped in this layer of greenhouse gases. Now, greenhouse gases are a good thing. They are what makes Earth, why we have life on Earth. It's because it's regulating our temperature from extremes. However, the problem occurs when those greenhouse gas concentrations rise too high and trap in more heat. I like to describe this as like the pickup truck effect. So if you have a truck parked on a sunny day with all the windows up, that sunlight comes in through the glass as shortwave energy. It gets radiated out as long-wave energy, and that long-wave energy can't escape. So that cab really heats up. And so the greenhouse gases are acting like glass. So what are the greenhouse gases and where are they in the US? So the top 4 ones are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Where are they coming from? The number one, the highest emitter of greenhouse gases, or the highest sector, is transportation, followed by electricity. So those 2 things make up more than half of our greenhouse gas emissions in the US. Then we have industry at 22%, commercial and residential at 12%, and agriculture is at 9%. There have been some exciting things that have been happening in the last couple of days. So the US rejoined the Paris Accord climate agreement. That's really exciting. And then our secretary nominee has said he would like to get the US to net zero emissions for farming by what year is it? Is it 2050, I think, Dave? You can write that in the chat box. And what I think is so exciting is it's possible. You know, agriculture is only emitting 9% of the greenhouse gases, so it is within our reach to make it net zero. So if we look at concentrations of greenhouse gases over the last 2,000 years, you can see that they're pretty level. They might go up and down a little bit, but they've been pretty level up until the late 1800s. If you look at that pink line, that represents 1880. So what is happening at the end of the 1800s to cause these greenhouse gases to suddenly shoot up almost vertically? So we have the beginning of the second industrial revolution. Electricity is invented. We've got cars being manufactured. So we're taking carbon that's been stored in the earth, coal, oil, taking it out of the earth to the atmosphere. If we look back over the last 800,000 years at carbon dioxide levels, and we know what these levels are due to ice core data, you can see that for 800,000 years, atmospheric carbon dioxide has never been above 300 parts per million. So it's fluctuated, but never gone above 300 parts per million since until about 1950. In the 50s, it went from 300 to the current level, which is 413. I want everybody to take a moment, pull out your phone, Google this on your computer, search for carbon dioxide level and the year that you were born, and write in the chat box what that number is. So search carbon dioxide level, the year that you were born, and what that level was. I think mine was 327 parts per million. Okay, 368, 327. Oh, yep. Dennis, you and I are the same age. 335, 322, 362, 337. Oh, I just emailed you about the cultural resource training. So, oh, some older employees for sure. Yeah. Great. So, yeah, you can see how the level has really risen dramatically in the last 40 years. And in fact, half of all human-related carbon dioxide emissions has occurred. Okay, Alicia, I think you Googled something wrong because we're only at 413. Thank goodness we're not at 477 yet. So I think maybe that was 377. Okay. So only half of human-related carbon dioxide emissions has occurred only in the last 40 years. Areas are getting warmer. So why are many areas getting wetter? Well, as temperatures increase, there's more water evaporation. Warmer air holds more water, so there's more water in the atmosphere. And then more water in the atmosphere, that's a greenhouse gas, so that's making the atmosphere warmer. So it's this vicious cycle. A lot of people have noticed that we seem to have more extreme weather. Have you guys noticed that in Pennsylvania? I think last winter it was like we had a -10 degree day, and then a few days later it was 60 degrees. Well, they think that why this is occurring, why there seems to be more extremes, is that our jet stream is becoming wavier. So you have these more extremes happening from day to day. So I find this chart. This is the US billion-dollar disaster events from 1980 to 2020. What jumps out at you when you look at this chart over the last 10 years of what disaster event has really increased? So what color are you noticing, and what's that corresponding disaster event? Feel free to write in the chat box. Yeah, severe storm count. Oh, Al Roker just used the term wavier jet stream this morning. Really? Oh, wow, cool. Yeah, severe storms. So in fact, over the last 10 years, there have been more billion-dollar disaster events from severe storms than the previous 30 years combined. Now, some of this is due to the fact that we have more people, we have more stuff, there's going to be more impervious surfaces, but a lot of this is from the fact that we're getting these more intense storms. And I am very hopeful that we can turn this around. The US hit peak greenhouse gas emissions in 2007, and we've been going down ever since. And in fact, with COVID this past year, one of the advantages, I know it's hard to think that there are advantages, but it has been, we've seen the largest drop in greenhouse gas emissions ever recorded. But the reason why we have this downward trend in greenhouse gas emissions in the US is that coal-fired generation and petroleum-fired generation for electricity has been going down. So, you know, electricity was the sector with the second highest emissions after transportation. And we're seeing this move from oil, carbon-based electricity generation to renewable energy. What are you guys seeing in Pennsylvania? I know in New York, I'm seeing a lot of solar farms happening, going in. Are you guys seeing solar, wind? Feel free to write in the chat box. Thermal, interesting. Yeah. Solar, yep. The other thing that gives me hope is that USDA has so many resources for agriculture. Some of the resources that we have, Comet Farm and Comet Planner, have you guys been using this in Pennsylvania? If you've used it with your farmers, can you write in the chat box? The climate hubs are a great resource. We also, as NRCS, we get $3.3 billion a year for technical and financial assistance to farmers through our programs. If we can begin to shift the focus on adapting to climate change and mitigating climate change, we have the ability to move the needle. I think more so than any other organization in the world, because of our resources. We have the people, we have those local trusted messengers, and we have the programs to an assistance to farmers to help them be resilient to climate change. And a lot of these practices that make them resilient to climate change also help mitigate the problem. Our soil health initiative, I know you guys in Pennsylvania have had some awesome soil health training. I know because I've actually been to some of the trainings. I think the last one that I went to was that in Harrisburg? I forget where it was, but that was a great training. And also one thing that I learned since starting my detail, but you soil scientists probably know that about 10 years ago, NRCS mapped where the majority of our soils or carbon are being stored in our soils. They map them in their location. So where do you think most of our carbon, what area of the country has seen the most storage of carbon in the soils? Does anybody know? Feel free to write in the chat box. Where has it been historically and where is it now? Where's our carbon being stored? Where would you guess that it's been stored historically? Tim says trees. Oh, Susan, yeah, perennial pastures. And then forest. So historically, oh, and Steve says forest land. Yeah, so historically our carbon has been stored in the Prairie Plains region. So you think about, just as Susan said, you think about the roots that have been putting that carbon into the soil all those years in the Prairie Plains. Again, that's what has made the US such a great country, is because we have those in the Midwest in our breadbasket. Since colonial times, however, we have lost about 50% of the carbon in our soils. Now where the carbon is being stored in our northern forests. Resource I just want to mention is the climate adaptation workbook. Has anybody used this? I'm curious, please write in the chat box if you've used the climate adaptation workbook. That was a product of the Climate Hub. I also want to just ask folks what other partners or resources are available in Pennsylvania. I know you guys have a lot, so feel free to use your microphone or write in the chat box what other things in Pennsylvania have you found helpful. Any state initiatives, extension, RC&D projects? Oh yeah, the PA No-Till Alliance. I'm just so envious of what you guys have done in Pennsylvania with no-till. The Joint Chiefs Initiative, what is that, Suzanne? I'd love to know about that. And then Shenango Crest. I'd love to hear what that is. DEP Small Business Advantage Grant, interesting. Okay, so the Joint Chiefs Initiative is implemented forest land practices. Susan, PA Grazing Lands Coalition, sure. Is the Park the Plow initiative still going on? I can hear somebody typing, so somebody may not be on mute. Oh, no Park the Plow anymore. Oh, that's too bad. That was an RC&D project, right, Susan? Any are there any partners on the line that would like to speak? Okay. Thing that gives me, oh, okay, so the Park the Plow line. So it's good that it's still going. So the other thing that gives me hope is that different farming practices can help farms be resilient to weather volatility. And there's kind of three parts to climate smart farming. There's effective planning, there's improving natural resources, that's improving the water and mineral cycles, the biological communities, and energy flow on the farm. There's also, you can increase infrastructure, such as high tunnels, irrigation, drainage. I'm not going to talk about that today. It can be expensive. You know, there's such a low profit margin in farming that I really want to focus on improving natural resources, which will help also improve profitability on the farm and productivity. So before we get into the practices, are there any questions, any comments? So climate smart farming. There's three components of this climate smart farming with planning and improving natural resources. So the first is addressing landscape vulnerability, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. The second is improving soil health. I know you've had a lot of great soil health training, so I'm gonna just kind of go quickly over that. And then the third part is increasing the health and diversity of biological organisms above and below. Talk about what is works. Let's talk a little bit about practices that are going to be increasingly problematic for farmers. The first is leaving soil bare. So you guys in Pennsylvania, you're very similar to us in New York in that maybe in the past soils have frozen over the winter time, frozen the whole winter, and then there's been a blanket of snow covering them. That's really protecting bare soil. Now, if we're looking at freeze-thaw cycles happening the whole winter, maybe there's some snow, but often there's probably going to be a lot more rain and the soils won't be frozen. You can see how that is going to be extremely problematic when you have bare soil in those scenarios. If you've got a lot of rain in winter and the ground is not frozen, that's going to be really problematic for bare soil. Fall tilling, I'm sure there's probably not a lot of that happening in Pennsylvania anymore, but moldboard plowing, continuous tilling, continuous grazing, farming marginal soils, and then climate adaptations involving expensive capital. So out of this list, what do you think is happening the most in Pennsylvania? I'm just curious to hear from folks. So feel free to write that in the chat box. What are you seeing the most of these practices? Or maybe you're not seeing these practices. Farming steeper slopes, interesting. Yep. Oh, combination of most of them. Okay, continuous grazing, farming slopes, and marginal land. Yeah, I see that a lot in New York. Organic farmers plowing marginal land. Yep. Yeah, I've seen that as well, especially if beginning farmers are coming and they're choosing land that might not be prime, and then wondering why it's getting super compacted because they're plowing a lot in silt and clay soils. All right, interesting. Planners is looking at the inherent properties of land and addressing landscape vulnerability. And this is really important. You know, all the cover crops in the world are not going to help a soil that is prone to flooding or prone to compaction. If it's a silt or clay, I mean, it can definitely improve, but let's not forget the inherent properties of the soil. So if a problem is increased rainfall that will make vulnerable parts of the farm more prone to flooding or erosion, a solution would be to take marginal land out of annual production and establish perennial systems. So that marginal land is those highly erodible soils on steep slopes, frequently flooded or ponded soils, shallow to bedrock soils, soils that easily compact, or areas that are prone to saltwater intrusion. So that is the marginal land. And perennial systems may include pasture or hay, so converting those tilled cropland to pasture or hay, perennial shrubs or trees, putting conservation buffers on streams, and then maybe switching or converting some land to pollinator habitat. Solution would be to install grassed waterways, diversions, contour buffer strips, and wasp cobs. You know, in New York, these were pretty popular maybe 30 years ago, and have not been, a lot have been put in since. So, but let's not forget about them. How about in Pennsylvania? Are you guys still seeing diversions or contour buffer strips being put in? You know, with this increased rainfall, it might be something that will be intense rainfall. Lots of diversions in grass waterways. Okay, really common still. That's great. That's awesome. Improving soil health. You know that there's the 4 practices or components of soil health: increasing organic matter, improving soil structure, keeping soils covered, and keeping plants growing throughout the year. I like to think of soil organic matter as one of the biggest things for the buck for farmers, because it has so much climate smart farming benefits. You know, it enhances infiltration and allows more of the soil mass to hold water. This is going to be really important as we start to oscillate between these heavy, intense storms, then drought. I mean, we're certainly seeing this in New York and New England. So the more that water can go into the soil and be held as a reservoir, the better. It reduces erosion, provides food for living organisms, enhances soil microbial biodiversity, is a reservoir for nutrients, and improves the cation exchange capacity. Increasing organic matter. How do you do that? Damien says the new PA Soil Health website is a terrific resource. Fantastic. Can you put a link to that in the chat box? So the best way to organic matter is through soil, in the soil is through roots. So 1/3 to 1/2 of all herbaceous roots die each year. And when they die, they're leaving behind injections of organic matter and these channels for water and air. You can also increase organic matter by top dressing manure or plant residues. You can inject it into the soil. Eventually that will work its way down, but it's the roots that are really effective at getting organic matter into the soil. You can also preserve soil organic matter by tilling less. So you guys are probably all pretty familiar with this, so I'm going to run through these quickly, just keeping an eye on them. So if a problem is increased rainfall and large storm events resulting in more ponding and runoff, a solution is to disturb the soil less and improve drainage with living communities. So out of all of these conservation tillage, what are you finding people doing the most or having the most success with? Tillage. Are people pretty much going all no-till? Are they doing zone follow-till? Rain says no-till. You're seeing that more common. Yeah, I'm so jealous of what doing in Pennsylvania, the no-till with cover crops, vertical, yep, vertical till. Anybody seeing no-till organic or any no-till organic or reduced? We're starting to see a little bit that in New York, especially no-till, yeah, at Rodale. Yep, there's certainly the experts, PASA. Oh, my hope is one day I can get to a PASA conference. Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit more no-till organic, which is really great. I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly. You probably have all seen this. People trying row crops with planting green may help organic. Yep. Okay, so you guys have probably seen this. Have you guys done a lot of soil health demonstrations in PA? Do you have soil health buckets? This is a great, of course, I love this demo. Another demo that I've had a lot of success with is taking soil from tilled areas and then no-till areas. You kind of mash it up, put it in the cylinder that has holes in the bottom, and then pouring water in. And you can really see how the no-till soil, the water just goes right into the soil versus the tilled soil, it starts to pond on top. So wait, did you guys have soil health buckets in for your teams? Yes, no? Feel free to write in the chat box. Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, in New York, we have one per team, which there are usually 3 counties per team. Yep, okay. So you should have a soil health toolkit. That's great. This is a picture of a rubber mold that has been poured into a crop field showing the nightcrawler channels. So you can see how biological activity can create these great channels that water can go into. And when you till, you're unfortunately destroying these channels and also destroying worms. When I started taking the soil health training, this was a huge paradigm shift for me, that compaction is a biological problem needing a biological solution. And, I saw that very vividly at the soil health training. Was that in Harrisburg? Susan, I know you and I were at that. I feel like that was 2 or 3 years ago. Where was that in Pennsylvania? Can you write that in the chat box? To everyone, where we visited a farm and we saw these very heavy machinery driving up and down these no-till fields, but there was just no compaction, and that was because of the living roots. The roots, you're not destroying those pathways, and that can really that is what enhances that. Compaction is not from, Susan said I was in SC, I think it was in SC when you came. Where's SC? Anyway, so when you have those pathways, that is what's going to help that infiltration, and compaction happens when you destroy that. Yeah, South Central, that sounds about right. It felt like the eastern part of PA. If anybody remembers that great soil health training about 3 years ago, write it in the chat box. Okay, so a problem is going to be increased soil temperatures. And increased soil temperatures, there's a couple of different ways. Lynn says, was that the one I presented? I don't think, maybe, I don't remember. It was in Lancaster County. Manheim? Yeah, okay, all right, thanks. That was driving me crazy. Yeah, so high soil temperatures can affect things a couple of different ways. The first is it can speed up biological activity, which volatilizes organic matter. So warmer soils, it's harder for organic matter to remain in the soil than cooler soils. Our northern forests, where we're accumulating so much of that soil carbon, part of that is temperature, less biological activity because the ground is frozen or cold. It will speed up biological activity up to a point. So it can discourage or kill beneficial soil organisms, alter root growth and nutrient uptake, which affects yield, and influence soil evaporation rate. So temperature effect on soil biological communities. For microorganisms, the ideal temperature, and now we're talking about soil temperature, the range is 50 to 96 degrees. Soil organisms begin to die above 130. And then when soil temperatures increase, organic matter tends to decrease. Macroorganisms, the worms and insects, the ideal temperature range is 50 to 75 degrees. That ideal temperature range for soil temperature is between 65 and 86. That's the ideal range for growth and also for nitrification. Around 80 degrees, many plants reach peak growth of roots and nutrient uptake. Above 90, plant and root growth begins to slow and stop, and then conditions start to become unfavorable to soil organisms. Graphic that kind of illustrates this. This was research done on a potato plant. So you can see the root growth, the plant growth increases up until about 86 degrees and then starts to decline higher than that. Temperature and moisture. So again, at 68 degrees, most of that water in the soil is being used for the plant. Every time you increase, for each degree increase, you get about a 1% increase in soil evaporation. That's going to differ a little bit based on, sunlight, wind, and humidity. But on average, when you reach 88 degrees, you're going to have 50% higher soil or water evaporation rate from the soil. When you hit 98 degrees, it's a third higher. So you might think that, like, well, but it's not often over 90 degrees. But what is covering the soil is going to have a huge impact on that soil temperature. So I just grabbed the soil temperature thermometer from my soil health bucket, and I did just a couple of experiments at my farm. And it was a really sunny, hot day in June, last June, and at 93 degrees, the ambient temperature was 93 degrees, so it was pretty hot, 93 in the shade. When I stuck the soil thermometer into a part of my pasture that had really good growth, so it was 8 to 10 inches, at 1 inch depth, the soil temp was 83 degrees. So that's a 10-degree difference. That is huge. Now at that 83 degrees, we're at that ideal temperature for growth. Actually, for cool season grasses, it's just a little bit lower, but we're still okay for growth and nitrification, and we don't have as much soil moisture loss. So you can see that grass is pretty green, even though we were experiencing a drought at the time. The mulched veggie beds in my garden, I had some veggie beds with about 1 inch of straw mulch. That temperature was 90 degrees at 1 inch depth. When I went just a few feet over to some overgrazed pasture where the temperature, no judgment, Susan, when the height was less than 1 inch, then the temperature was 108 degrees. So now we're looking at 15 degrees higher than the ambient temperature. When I went to a that was bare soil, it was 115 degrees. I had one bed that I was solarizing just to get rid of weed seeds. 128 degrees under that black plastic. So that's a 45-degree difference, all within a space of about 100 feet, based on what was being, what the soil was covered. Have you guys done this demo in crop fields? Anybody use this? I just find this one, farmers really resonate with this. Any comments on this? Rain says no, but this would be so great. Yeah, we tend not to realize that the pastures or the crop fields that are covered really are holding on to the moisture by quite a bit. And I really think that this, after doing this kind of changed my pasture. You know, I had a lot of weeds in my pasture this year, a lot of Queen Anne's lace. And while it didn't great, and I got some comments from my neighbors that my pastures were looking really weedy. At the same time, they were much greener than my neighbors' pastures. And when I pulled that Queen Anne's lace out of the ground, that taproot was just really intense. So for me, it was my tillage radish, Queen Anne's lace. I did clip later on when we got some rains to get rid of some weeds, but for the most part, I kept that vegetation. Advantage alone. So a solution will be, of course, cover soil with mulch or plants. This is a photo of a no-till organic veggie farm I work with outside of Albany. They're do a really great job. They have very little bare soil. They try to keep everything covered. And as a consequence, they have they don't irrigate. They do a little bit of irrigating in the springtime if it's dry when they're getting plants or seeds started. But pretty much they don't irrigate. And this is an example of a farm on what I would consider marginal soils. But they have great production. Also cover the soil with crop residue. And then of course, cover crops. Pennsylvania, again, just so jealous of your farmers and what they're doing with cover crops. But one thing I just will point out, and I experience this, is that it's going to be really important, especially if we've got these wetter, cooler springs. Cover crops are going to even be more important because that's going to allow the farmer to get out on their fields sooner. Because while cover crops might keep the soil a little bit cooler, they will keep them drier. And it's interesting because one of the folks in the Climate Hub got feedback from a producer in Maryland who says, I don't see this, that the cover crops keep them cooler because at night, if you look at the average temperature, it's actually going to keep it a little bit warmer at night. So they were not finding that they kept it cooler in the spring. Cover crops are going to regulate the temperature, moderate the temperature. Think of cover crops as improving energy flow and increasing soil carbon over a longer period of the growing season. So if you think of corn, you know, that might be capturing sun's energy from late May or May to September, October, maybe a little bit earlier in Pennsylvania. But if you add cover crops, you can extend the period of time where you are taking that solar energy. So if we think of plants as a solar panel, you're taking that energy from the sun and storing it into the battery or the soil or the roots. So that's a way to energize the soil, so to speak. A photo I love from Virginia. I took this in March where you don't have leaf out. So it's this gray March day, but yet this cornfield is such a vibrant green from the winter rye that you can see is just taking that solar energy. I mean, winter rye is just so great because it can be January and bright green, even though it's had really cold temperatures. I mean, cool season grasses as well. You know, I was remarking in my own pasture, which is a little bit north of you guys, just still, even though it's been really cold, I'm still seeing green in some of those cool season grasses. This is a great photo of a summer annual cover crop for folks that might have fallow fields. And I think the opportunity with climate change will be this longer growing season. So there's more opportunities for fall cover crops. I mentioned that it seems like our season is extending more into the fall, and that's going to really benefit cover crops. I mean, this is just a experiment that was done at the Plant Materials Center in Big Flats. Has anybody been to the PMC at Big Flats? Just showing that the earlier you can plant a cover crop, the more productive it is. Cropping is another solution, like planting another cash crop like triticale after corn. I'm starting to see a little bit more red clover with interseeded with wheat, and summer annuals planted in a fallow field. What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing triticale, maybe sorghum, Sudan grass? What are you guys seeing for cover crops? Cocktail mixes? Feel free to share in the chat box or use your microphone. Anybody out there? All of that and Ray's crazy. Yeah. Rye, triticale, annual ryegrass, hairy vetch or crimson clover. Sometimes include radish or rapeseed. Mixes clovers for nitrogen. Yeah, you guys in Pennsylvania are so lucky, just a little bit north, and folks cannot use nitrogen fixers because the season's just not long enough. Yep, cereal rye. Oh, I love. It's just so forgiving. Who was I? Let's see. So, Maine. I was giving the presentation to Maine, and they were saying peas, oats, and vetch was a big popular mix. Anybody else? So triticale, sorghum, Sudan. That people seeing that? Any others? I know you guys are doing amazing things. Cover crops. Triticale for sure, great. All right. Nice. Okay, so the third component of climate smart farming is increasing biological communities above and below ground. I like this slide because it just illustrates that if you have a healthy biological community in the soil, it really helps plant deal with stress. So some of the stresses that they're going to be experiencing with climate change are, you know, temperature, waterlogging, drought, insects. Having this soil, healthy soil, biological communities can really make these plants resilient. We're also going to see a problem with increased pests and decreased survivability of these. add or protect food and habitat for pollinators and other beneficial insects. So if more than 20% of a farm is diverse habitat, pest control by beneficial insects is observed throughout the fields. So there's a real advantage to the smaller, more diverse farm. I know you guys are getting into a little bit more of acres of monocultures, but having that diversity, those hedgerows, really does help with pest control. So another solution is to add or protect messy spaces. Roughly 30% of native bees nest in hollow plant stems and woody material. Also, 70% of native bees nest underground, so disturbing the soil less is really beneficial, especially for cucurbits, you know, and squashes. I know there's been some research done with no-till pumpkins, and one of the advantage is that you've got that squash bee, which is pollinating those pumpkins, nesting at the base of the plant, so you can increase your pollination if you disturb the soil less and allow those habitat for the native bees. Summary, the three things that you're going to do when thinking about planning a climate smart farm is looking at that marginal land. Marginal land is only going to become more difficult to farm in the future. So if you have soils that are prone to flooding, that's only going to get worse. Soils that are prone to erosion, that is only going to get worse unless you do, put in practices to help. Improving soil health and then increasing the health and biodiversity of organisms above and below ground. Any questions so far on the climate smart farming practices? Anything that anybody wants to add, maybe that I haven't mentioned? Feel free to use the microphone or a chat box. Anything that you're seeing is particularly successful or not successful? Tall grazing, yes, Susan, that is great. And actually, I should say the presentation I'm giving you guys is a bit of an abbreviated presentation. The full training is about 3 hours. It will be available in AgLearn starting probably in March. And there's a couple of different extra modules in that presentation. And one of them is considerations for livestock owners. Tall grazing, I think, is going to be a great climate smart farming practice because of the soil shading components, but also getting those roots down into the ground. And another practice that I think can be very beneficial is winter bale grazing. And I don't know if you guys are seeing a lot of that in Pennsylvania, winter bale grazing, where you put hay bales, round bales out kind of in a checkerboard pattern throughout the pasture, and then rotate, much as you would during the summer, rotate animals through the winter. The key is to keep them rotating and not having them in one spot too long. But that allows the animal to spread their own manure, urine, and also utilize and recycle some of the dead vegetation, and whatever hay does not get eaten gets trampled in. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, you guys are awfully quiet. You're making me nervous. Feel free to write more in the chat box. Okay, NRCS planning and resources for farmers. You know, obviously we have CTA and our 9-step planning process, and we've got a number of GIS layers. But I wanted to ask you, what would you like to see? Is there anything in CART, maybe existing now, or that you would like to see for that would help in planning? One of the liaisons for this year, Sarah Thompson, is working on adding some information to CART to help plan with climate smart farming planning. Funding, I've mentioned, you know, we've got some great programs. You know, one thing that I think we'll see is a restoration program. You know, if you've got fields that are wet and are getting wetter, they may be great candidates for WRE. And certainly EQIP and CSP, we have some great opportunities through those. And I think it looked like in the climate change recommendations for the transition team that CRP, so those marginal lands, be prioritized for CRP. Resource concerns. We have a couple of new resource concerns under soil organism habitat loss and degradation, and aggregate instability. We also have another new resource concern on weather resilience, ponding and flooding, and natural available moisture. So I'm curious, are you guys using weather resilience as a resource concern in Pennsylvania? John also commented energy conservation on farms, reduce energy variable speed pumps, yeah, and new lights, get evaluation done to see. Yeah, and John, that brings up a good point. I kind of have not gone into any of the conservation type, mitigation type climate smart farming practices, such as, you know, cover and flare of manure storages or irrigation, water efficiency. So that's a good, thanks for bringing that up. There's certainly a lot of energy conservation practices that we have. So no, it sounds like you're not using weather resilience. Is that because maybe you're not sure how to? Or is there a reason why weather resilience is not being used, do you think? Yeah, it feels like it overlaps with other concerns. I can see that for sure. So we do have a lot of existing resource concerns that are available. Number of common climate smart farming practices, you know, in existence. All of these can be for climate smart farming. There's a couple of new ones, soil carbon amendment, soil caps, health caps, and soil testing. Are you guys using those three in Pennsylvania? Yes, no? Okay, working on getting 116 up and running. Yeah, I think what people have been having issues with is just finding TSPs. Hopefully you have more TSPs in PA. Soil testing, no, we don't have our, okay, 2021 cost list. So you guys aren't, sounds like you're not using soil carbon amendment now. but maybe in 2022. Okay, great. I just want to wrap up by saying the Northeast is experiencing, oh, Jody says letting New York and New Jersey test it first. Yeah, that's probably not a bad idea to let other states do the hard work. Anyone's doing the same thing, I think. The Northeast is experiencing an increase in temperatures, especially in winter, more extreme temperatures, increased rainfall, and increased frequency of intense rainfall. And these trends are predicted to continue and worsen. But improving natural resources on the farm can significantly help farmers be resilient to these changes. And we can do that, addressing landscape vulnerability, improving soil health, increasing health and diversity of biological organisms above and below ground. And with our new vision statement, because I think it's important to know and understand and visualize what we are all working towards. And that is a world of clean and abundant water, healthy soils, resilient landscapes, and thriving agricultural communities through voluntary conservation. I also just love this photo. Again, this came off of the USDA Flickr accounts historical photos album, and this was taken in the 30s. Wrap up by saying thank you for what you guys do. I really appreciate it. You guys are helping some of the most important members of our society, our farmers, be resilient to all these changes that are happening. So thank you for what you do. I really appreciate it. With that, I'll take questions. While I'm taking questions, we can get set up for the quiz competition. If you go to use your smartphone or computer and go to that website, in fact, I will put it in the chat box. Oh, let's see. And just get that called up. That should get the quiz up. Okay, so maybe copy and paste if you can't click on it. Are there any questions? And by the way, nothing will show up until I log in, but I just wanted to get people into that website before, while I'm taking any questions. Any questions? Oh, Brett asks, what does zero emissions from farming looks like in 2050? That's a really great question. And I think what, to me, it looks like, maybe other people want to jump in, is, hold on, let me just get this started. And I'm gonna put a question up there so people can start answering. So what does it look like? So to me, it looks like farms that are putting more carbon into the soil than what they are emitting. So they might still be emitting greenhouse gases, but they are offsetting that by putting in soil or carbon into the soil. So, and Lynn says, yeah, we're talking about net emissions, not total emissions. So yeah, so that's basically it. So being very energy efficient, maybe having solar or wind powering electrical systems on the farm, reducing the amount of fuel that they're using. So looking at those energy efficiency measures, and then seeing how they can increase carbon sequestration. Does anybody else want to answer that? Anybody else see that? You got better manure management, maybe livestock feed supplements, or yeah, some reducing feed, or just doing feed efficiency. I think we're tending, when we talk about air quality in NRCS, we tend to think about just odors, but I have a feeling it's going to be more about reducing greenhouse gases. Yeah, Dan says reducing protein content of dairy feed for sure. Oh my gosh, how many people are on this this webinar? It seems like there's a lot because we've got a lot of lot of people doing the quiz. 180. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that. You guys rock in PA. As was mentioned, energy efficiency is important. Make the farm as efficient as possible to improve from there. Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're gonna do the, so yeah, it has increased 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. I'm sure there's going to be so many right answers that it's going to be hard to see the leaderboard, but the U.S. region seeing the least increase in average temperature is what region? And no Googling the answers. I live in a net zero home, so for me that for net zero residential, well here, let's just get to the answer in this. Southeast. Has increased as many as how many weeks in some parts of the country? So while people are answering that, yeah, so I live in a net zero home. So all of my systems, with the exception of my cook stove, and I do have a gas fireplace for aesthetics, run off electric. And so I have solar, solar electric, solar hot water, and passive solar. Got some leaders here. Perhaps the most difficult change in climate farmers are facing in the Northeast is what? Yeah, so I do consume energy, but I am using solar hot water, and passive solar to offset that. And intense rain events. Some parts of the US are becoming wetter. Some parts are becoming much drier. The region experiencing the greatest decrease in average rainfall is what? But, oops, sorry here. Which sector produces the most net greenhouse gas emissions in the US? Great job. Oh, we've got Abby Reiter in the lead. For the last 800,000 years, up until about 1950, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were never above how many parts per million? And no putting answers in the chat box. Parts per million. Okay, yeah, technically 350 and 415 and 300 were 2010 to 2019, the US had more billion-dollar disasters than the previous 3 decades combined in what category? Oh, we've got Abby in the lead, but there's a bunch of folks who are right behind her. What is one way to improve natural resources on the farm to become more resilient to climate change? Land would benefit most from going to annual production from a transition of annual to perennial production? Steep slopes. Oh, we now have 5 people in the lead. What soil temperature does plant and root growth begin to slow and stop for most crops? "90 degrees." Are problems associated with excessively high soil temperatures, except what? Increase in nutrient utilization. Covering bare soil with cover crops or organic matter does the following. Somehow that went, can I go back? Buffers soil temperatures against extremes. Oh, we got 5 people in the lead. Where do most native bees nest? Ground. Can NRCS planners identify in order to help farmers implement climate smart farming? Weather resiliency. Oh, wow. We have 4 winners, Abby Ryder, Amanda B, Anita M, and Brett. So you will be getting a special prize of some New York maple syrup and New York cheddar cheese. If you guys, would you guys mind emailing me your address? I'll put my email in the chat box, and I'll get it out to you. Yeah, so email me your addresses. Well, that concludes our program. Thank you so much, Pennsylvania. I also wanted to mention, as climate change occurs in the Northeast, a lot of us in New York and New England are going to be looking to Pennsylvania to see what is working. I've been giving this training to all the states in the Northeast, and that has been a common thought of that in New York and New England that will be looking to Pennsylvania, especially because you guys are doing such a great job with reduced tillage, no-till, and cover crops. So thank you for your attention today. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
If
Well,
anybody
again,
has any questions, you can either type them in or you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great. Well, thank you to Dan Ludwig, and thank you, Denise Coleman, for having me today.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for this wonderful presentation. I thought it was excellent and very informative for what we're dealing with and seeing, from the past up through now and into the future. So, yes, very much appreciate you taking your time this morning to present to us. And is there any last questions for Elizabeth?
I'll just have to end by saying rock and roll.
Absolutely. All right, if there's no other questions, then I thank everybody for taking the time today and attending. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or to Elizabeth.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Tim.
Oh, you bet. I was doing a bit of multitasking, so.
Oh, are you on the phase 3 wetland training?
Yep.
Yep. I saw that that was scheduled at the same time as this. I was supposed to be on that training too, but I was like, oh well.
Yeah, I just split the screens and made my volumes the same so I could kind of listen to Karen and listen to you at the same time. But I'll admit I focus more on you than Karen.
Oh, thank you. I take that as a compliment. We won't say anything. Yeah, I love, I wondered how many people got the good, good, good and rock and roll reference.
There's probably at least a third to maybe a half would remember Larry.
You can never forget Larry. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Pennsylvania had some of the best RC&D coordinators. Brent says he did, or she, and then Kevin says nothing like a Larry Shart send off for sure.
Absolutely.
That and his candy canes.